Welcome to AP Biology. This is an introduction to evolution. Evolution is a change in a population over time. Be careful to remember that it's a change in population, not an individual, except in rare cases where like a flower can double its chromosome number in one generation. Don't worry about that in general. What I want you to know, the general rule here, is that evolution is a change in a population, not a change in an individual. So ignore the whole Pokemon evolve thing. Totally not true. But you can see a population of flowers here. Some are red, some are white. Over a couple of generations, maybe you have only red flowered individuals. And so that's a change in the population, not in an individual. And that's what we would define as evolution. This is microevolution, where you're just seeing allele frequencies change over generations. I'll define that word for you in just a minute. So some vocabulary: species. Species is a group of organisms that can mate and produce fertile offspring. So for example, the lancet and the lamprey are different species because they can't mate with each other. But all lampreys can mate with each other, and so they would all be the same species. A few more vocab words that you would have gotten had we done genetics first, but we're doing it in a different order this year. So a gene is a piece of DNA that codes for a trait. An allele is a form or variation of the gene. So for example, flower color is the gene, and so if you look at your DNA or the DNA that you'd find, that's a bad picture of DNA. Anyway, the DNA that would be in these cells, maybe this segment of it codes for color, and there are some variations of that DNA that code for purple. And other flowers maybe, or other pieces of other flowers or the other chromosome might have a variation that's white. And so one variation is purple, one variation is white. That would be the allele. And so maybe one flower has two alleles for white, maybe another flower has two alleles for purple, and maybe another flower has alleles, one allele for purple, one allele for white, right? So you have these different combinations. So anyway, the allele is the form or the variation. We'll be talking a lot about alleles in this unit. You won't see the term genotype, but you will see the term phenotype. But they kind of go together, so I'm just going to talk about them now. So a genotype is the gene combination that you get. So in sexually reproducing organisms, you have a mom and a dad. So big P would be a genotype. Big P would be another genotype, and little p would be another genotype. The phenotype is a physical feature, though. So this one and this one would probably both be purple. When you looked at them, that's the phenotype. This one would be white. When you look at it, that's the phenotype. And so we'll be talking a lot about phenotype. It's just the physical feature that you get. Phenotype is based on genotype and environment. So let's pretend that skin color is caused by just one gene, which it's not. But let's pretend that it is. Maybe this baby inherits two big B alleles, and we'll pretend it's simple dominance, which it's not. But anyway, let's say this baby inherited a big B and a big B from mom and dad. The phenotype that this kid has is a little bit darker skin, and this one inherited a little b, and so this baby inherited lighter skin. This one is here. And then environment also affects you. So if you spend more time in the sun, that stimulates your skin to make more melanin, and so your skin gets darker. So phenotype is based on genotype, sometimes only genotype, but a lot of times in an interaction between genotype and phenotype. All right. Fitness, another definition that I want you to know. Fitness is the reproductive success of an organism. So if this mom here produces lots of babies who can then go on and produce babies of their own, that would be a highly fit organism. If the mom dies, or the mom can't find a mate, or the mom isn't taking care of the baby, then that mom would have a low fitness. So reproductive success is not only how many babies you make, but how many babies they make. So can those babies go on and reproduce? Okay, so next vocab word is selective pressure. Selective pressure, where's my thing? Sorry, selective pressure is anything either biotic or abiotic that changes the fitness of living organisms within a given environment. So biotic means living things. So maybe a predator would be a biotic selective pressure. So if in the evolution of these whales, if there was another maybe sea creature that was eating them up and could catch the ones with long long limbs better, that would be a biotic force. Or maybe a virus, maybe there's a new virus that's affecting these whales and it kills ones with a certain susceptibility to the virus, that would be another biotic force. Abiotic is non-living. So that might be the water. So water is a really important selective pressure in the evolutionary history of whales. So they evolved from land creatures that had longer legs. And so maybe if you had long legs instead of these shorter, stubby fins, maybe if you had long legs, you were more easily caught. You couldn't swim so fast, so you wouldn't be able to get away from predators. That's kind of a combination of the biotic and the abiotic. But this nice, sleek, uh, body plan here, that would be selected for based on water. They're able to swim better. So any whales that had a more any whales that had a combination of mutations or alleles that allowed them to be more sleek and have a body more like this had a higher fitness, they were more able to survive and reproduce. Any that maybe had these long legs instead of these nice, flat, short fins, they just weren't able to swim so fast. And so that would be a selective pressure. They would be eaten, more likely to be eaten. Okay, selective pressure can push a population in a new direction. So you'll see a picture like this on your on the questions I'm giving you today. So let's say this is the different natural variation that you find among these mice or moles or whatever they are. This is the frequency of individuals. So that means there aren't very many who are light, there aren't very many who are dark, but there are a whole lot, high number, right? Compared to a low number, high number of individuals who are this medium color. If there's a hawk that can see the light colored ones from above better, these might all get eaten up, which means that only these medium colored ones or the dark colored ones would be able to reproduce more. And so over the next, several years, when I came back later, I would find that there really weren't any of the light colored ones or very few of them. Most of the individuals were darker and even the average ones were darker. So that would be a selective pressure of hawks eating these moles. And it might not be color, it might be susceptibility to a virus, it might be the thickness of a cell wall of a plant. There's all kinds of things that you could find variation in. So you're going to have your variation in phenotype along this x-axis. If, for example, instead you had maybe the hawks could eat the light-colored ones, but maybe a snake ate the dark-colored ones, you might find something like this with the medium-colored ones selected for. Okay, a few quick notes on Darwin's principles of natural selection because they come up in the beginning of this unit. He said, if left unchecked, the number of organisms of each species will increase exponentially. So if you have a pair of bunnies, they make more than 2 bunnies in their lifetime. They might make several, I don't know, I think they make like 5 bunnies I think they can have like a new litter every few months anyway. That's a lot of bunnies. But he noticed that that doesn't really happen. 2 bunnies will not tend to change into 5,000 bunnies over a few years. Instead, populations tend to remain very stable. So why is that? That's because environmental resources are limited, so there's only so much food. Also, there's predators around, there are viruses around, right? He also noticed another thing, that there's variation in a population. You can see it in fur color pretty easily, but there's a lot of variation that you can't see, like variation in the ability to withstand a virus, or ability to smell a predator, or ability to make really good holes in the ground that they can escape to. Maybe some bunnies have a couple of escape routes from their hole, right? So there are lots of variations in the environment in populations. Production of more individuals that then can be supported by the environment leads to a struggle for survival. So the variation is genetic, at least some of it. It's inherited, right? And some of that variation is better for a particular environment than others. And so there's a struggle for survival, and only some survive. Maybe that poor bunny, or whatever it is, maybe that poor bunny was not as good at hiding. Maybe it couldn't smell the predators quite as well, whereas maybe one of its siblings did survive because it had some variations that were a little bit better. In this environment, maybe a certain color or a certain ability to smell is better, but maybe in the Arctic, the variations that would be better there are a little bit different than the variations that would be better here. Maybe in the Arctic, they need to have a thicker coat. Maybe if they were white, they would be better. Whereas here, in this environment that you can see here, maybe brown is better. So the variation really depends on the particular environment. The variations selected for depend on the environment. So what is the ultimate source of all variation in a population? It's mutation. It's a change in DNA. But the difference between you and your siblings probably isn't a whole bunch of new mutations. It's probably just that the alleles that your parents have, the variations that your parents have, were mixed up, and you only got half of mom's variations, whereas your brother or your sister might have gotten a different half of alleles from mom, right? And same thing with dad. So we're going to spend a whole unit on that when we do meiosis in a little bit. So any mutant allele may increase its relative frequencies over generations as a result of natural selection. So the mutation is random, but the selection for that mutation is usually not random. It's often natural selection that increases the frequency, the relative amount of individuals with that mutation over many, many generations. So chance creates new variations by mutation and also by sexual recombination, right? That's why you and your siblings are different. Natural selection favors some variations over others, and it depends on the environment. In this environment, this moth is better. In this environment, this moth is better, right? So the variation that's selected for really does depend on the environment, right? So mutation's random, natural selection is not random. This produces organisms that are better fit for their particular environment. This organism is not fit for this environment. This organism is not fit for the other environment. Mutations are random, but natural selection is not random. So for example, let's say you have a whole bunch of bacteria. They're mainly susceptible to some antibiotic. But let's say the person has never taken the antibiotic. They have strep throat. These are the bacteria that are making them sick. Just by random chance, there were a couple of mutations right here that caused some resistance to a particular antibiotic. These random variations exist, and then the person, this is time right here, right? And then the person takes an antibiotic, they go to the doctor, they get an antibiotic. The antibiotic kills all of these, but it doesn't kill the ones that were resistant. Who goes on and makes more babies? Well, the ones that are alive, right? And so over time, what you end up with is a whole population of resistant bacteria. So this original mutation is random, but the selection is non-random. If you had taken a different antibiotic instead, it might have been that this one was resistant to it and these would have died. So some misconceptions. Sometimes students think that the environment changes, and so organisms try to produce good mutations to evolve in order to make the species survive. That is not true. Organisms do not make good mutations. Organisms naturally, when they reproduce, when they make their gametes, sometimes there's a mutation. It is completely random. Which A changes to a T or C to a G or whatever, completely random. No one tries to mutate. It's just random. And sometimes you have a good mutation, and most of the time you have a bad mutation. Also, be careful of statements that sound like Lamarck. You might remember Lamarck from freshman bio. He said that, well, blacksmiths are burly, strong men. And so they got that way because they had to use their bodies a lot and got strong and muscly. And so their babies will inherit the traits that their dads had. Not true. Maybe they were strong because the weaker guys just didn't make very good blacksmiths. And Anyway, so he said that adaptations to the environment are acquired in an organism's lifetime and passed to kids. So he said that like giraffes, ancestral giraffes, tried to stretch their necks to reach higher branches, and so therefore their babies would have longer necks. Not true. The giraffes that had longer necks could get the food more easily, and so they survived and made more babies. The ones with shorter necks didn't survive. They didn't make babies. It's not a matter of trying. So acquired changes are not passed on to offspring, except for this weird epigenetic thing that I'll talk about later. But the code, the ATC's Gs, that is not changed over your lifetime except with random mutations, right? So if this dog has its tail cut off here, its babies are still born with tails. Acquired changes don't change your genetic code. If my arm gets cut off accidentally in a car accident, my babies, if I had any more kids, would not be born with a missing arm, right? If you have sickle cell anemia, let's say you have where's my pad? Let's say you have little s instead of, let's call them n's. Let's say you have little n. Normal would be this would be heterozygous. Let's say you have sickle cell anemia. Which means you have two genes for like this bummer trait. Let's say you have a bone marrow transplant that kills all of your bone marrow, and you have your cells replaced with someone with normal hemoglobin. You'll be fine for your lifetime, but you're going to pass down the genes from your gametes, not from your bone marrow, right? So your babies are still going to get one of these traits, right? So any changes acquired in your lifetime are not passed on to your offspring. The only thing that's passed on to your offspring is the DNA in your gametes. If there's a mutation there, then that's passed on.